The Widow, Episode 27. The moon, large and red like an ember, illuminated the sinister shadow that slithered across the window of Isabel's room. She, Ricardo's widow, felt the heat of the newly awakened passion for Daniel, but a cold shiver ran down her spine. Someone was watching her. A raspy, menacing whisper echoed in her ears. "He doesn't want you, Isabel. You will never be happy." It was a familiar voice, laden with hatred, and it was a warning. The door creaked, opening slowly, revealing the dark silhouette of someone she knew very well, someone who swore to prevent her happiness at all costs. The moon, large and red as if about to explode, painted Isabel's room in a threatening tone. The shadows danced on the walls like ghosts playing hide-and-seek. Isabel, lying in bed, still felt the warmth of Daniel's body, the man who was slowly melting the ice that had frozen her heart since Ricardo's death. But that delicious warmth was now overshadowed by a much greater cold, a cold that came not from the chilly night outside, but from a threat looming over her. Remember that feeling when you're on a swing, high, and suddenly you feel like you're going to fall? That's how Isabel felt. The joy of reborn love was mixed with a deep fear, like a poisoned sweet. The voice, a raspy, menacing whisper, still echoed in her ears. "He doesn't want you, Isabel. You will never be happy." It was a voice she recognized, although she tried not to admit it to herself. A voice full of anger, possession, a hatred so dense it seemed to suffocate the night air. The door creaked, a groan of old, tired wood, and then, slowly, it opened. A dark silhouette materialized at the entrance, filling the room with a sinister aura. Isabel's heart pounded, beating strongly against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed the terror that invaded her. She recognized the thin, hunched body, the shoulders curved by a weight of grief and revenge. It was Bruno, Ricardo's brother. Bruno, who had always secretly loved Isabel. A dark and possessive love that Ricardo never noticed, or perhaps simply ignored. A sickly love that was now transforming into something monstrous, like a plant that grew in the shade and fed on hatred. He watched her intently like a hungry wolf stalking its prey. His dark, piercing eyes seemed to burn, piercing Isabel's soul. The silence between them was heavy, suffocating, as dense as the smoke of an approaching fire. Isabel tried to breathe, but it seemed that she lacked air, trapped in her throat by a knot of fear. She tried to understand what Bruno wanted, what he planned. What did that sinister warning mean? Bruno took a hesitant step towards the bed, as if with each movement an invisible thread was being broken. With each step closer, the barriers between the real world and her nightmares were collapsing. The moon, which looked like a giant, malevolent eye in the sky, cast long, twisted shadows that merged with Bruno's shadow, creating a monster of unimaginable proportions. Isabel felt a wave of cold run down her spine, a cold that had nothing to do with the night's temperature. It was the cold of fear, the cold of the sinister warning that had been whispered in her ear, the cold of the hatred emanating from Bruno. She knew, deep down, that nothing would be the same again. The love with Daniel, so recent and precious, was threatened by a black storm, a storm that Bruno was about to unleash. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words were choked by a sob of anger and pain. The hatred in his eyes intensified, becoming an expression of pure, raw, implacable fury. He raised one hand, trembling, towards her, almost as if he were preparing to touch her face, but then stopped, hesitating. At that moment, the silence was even worse, more oppressive than the threats he had not yet uttered. Time seemed to stop, stretching like rubber, an elastic band that could snap at any moment, releasing all the burden of pain, fear, and resentment that hung between them. The atmosphere carried so much hatred and suffering that Isabel could feel the air vibrating under its weight. Isabel watched Bruno, her eyes examining him deeply, looking for a crack of humanity in that darkness. Was there still something of her brother, of Ricardo, hidden behind that veil of hatred? Or was it too late to try to rescue the friendship, the respect, the compassion that once existed between them? The answer, she knew, was hidden in the depths of Bruno's tortured soul, a black abyss that she was about to explore. And with each passing second, the feeling of danger grew. It wasn't just Daniel's love that was at stake, it was Isabel's own life. Isabel's breath was caught in her throat, a knot of terror that prevented her from screaming, from begging, from doing anything but watching Bruno, That man, once so close, was now a menacing shadow, an embodiment of fear. The hatred in his eyes was liquid, palpable, almost as if she could touch it, feel it burning her skin. He hesitated, his hand outstretched, trembling like a leaf at the mercy of a gale. He looked like a wounded animal, trapped in a trap of his own bitterness. Suddenly, Bruno lowered his hand as if he had been pulled back to reality by an invisible force. A sob escaped his lips, broken by a muffled sound, as if he were trying to suppress a desperate cry. His voice, when it finally came out, was hoarse, almost inaudible, a murmur laden with ancient pain, of an unrequited love that had rotted inside him, turning into a venomous decay. I didn't want ... he stammered, his voice failing. The words were like shards of glass, cutting the dense silence of the room. Isabel watched his shoulders tremble, the fragility hidden behind the hard shell of hatred, a frightening facet of his tortured soul. He turned, his back curved under the weight of immeasurable pain, a pain that Isabel felt as if it were her own. The image of Bruno, Ricardo's brother, destroyed by his own passion, struck her hard. That man who had threatened her moments before was now more lost and fragile than she had ever imagined. But compassion could not erase the fear. The threat was present, even with his apparent fragility. She knew that Bruno's visit was not a mere fit of anger. There was something more, a more elaborate plan, a dark plot that she could not yet decipher. He mumbled something inaudible and, with one last look, laden with a lethal mixture of hatred and despair, left the room, leaving Isabel alone with the darkness and a chilling terror that settled in her bones. Isabel got up, her legs shaky, and went to the window. The red moon was still there, a silent witness to that dramatic scene. Fear was a knot in her throat, but the confusion was even greater. What did Bruno want? What did that sinister warning mean? And worst of all, what would his next step be? Had he merely scared her, or was he planning something much worse, something that could end her newly discovered happiness? The memories of Daniel, his kisses, his warmth, now seemed like a distant dream, a mirage in the middle of a desert of fear. The joy had turned gray, dimmed by the sinister shadow of the threat that loomed over her. The reborn love was like a delicate flower growing on unstable ground, a dormant volcano ready to explode at any moment. Isabel knew she was alone in her struggle. Daniel was a light in her life, but Bruno's darkness was too powerful and threatened to consume her. Her life, so fragile and vulnerable, was between the flame of hope and the darkness of revenge. And she needed to fight with all her might, to survive the approaching night, a night that promised to be darker and more terrible than all the others. The red moon seemed like a harbinger, an ominous sign that the storm was about to break over her. And Isabel prepared herself, her heart pounding in her chest, to face the unknown. After all, she was a widow, accustomed to surviving storms, but this time, the storm seemed to want to take her to the depths of the sea. The moon, large and red like an ember, illuminated the sinister shadow that slithered across the window of Isabel's room. A cold shiver ran down her spine, even with the warmth of Daniel's body still present on her sheets. Someone was watching her. A raspy, menacing whisper echoed in her ears, cold as a knife blade. "He doesn't want you, Isabel. You will never be happy." It was the voice of Bruno, Ricardo's brother, laden with a hatred so dense it seemed to suffocate the night air. The door creaked, opening slowly, revealing the dark silhouette of Bruno, like a specter risen from the depths of hell. Isabel, lying in bed, still felt the warmth of Daniel's body, the man who was slowly melting the ice that had frozen her heart since Ricardo's death. But that warmth was now a distant echo, overshadowed by the mortal chill emanating from Bruno, a cold that penetrated to the bones. Remember that feeling when you're at the top of a giant slide, about to go down at an incredible speed? That's how Isabel felt, the joy of newly discovered love mixed with a deep fear, like a delicious, dark chocolate containing poison. Bruno's voice, raspy and menacing, echoed in her mind, a mantra of despair. "He doesn't want you, Isabel. You will never be happy." She knew he said that driven by an obsessive and sickly love for her, a love that had transformed into suffocating hatred after his brother's death. Bruno took a hesitant step towards the bed, and Isabel could feel the weight of the hatred he emanated, heavy as a mountain of stones. Each step he took was a death sentence for her newfound happiness. The silence between them was heavy, suffocating. Isabel tried to breathe, but fear choked her, trapping the air in her throat. Bruno's dark, piercing eyes pierced her like poisoned arrows, hitting her heart squarely. He was so close that Isabel smelled his hatred, a fetid and sour odor. The moon, like an evil eye, cast shadows that seemed to move of their own accord, creating a terrifying scenario. Bruno raised a trembling hand, almost as if he were going to touch her, but he hesitated. At that moment, the silence was even worse, more oppressive than any scream. Time seemed to stop, stretching, about to snap like an overloaded elastic band. Isabel watched Bruno, looking for a thread of humanity in the abyss of hatred that consumed him. But all she saw was darkness. Suddenly, Bruno lowered his hand, as if an invisible force had pulled him back to reality. A hoarse sob escaped his lips, broken by a muffled sound, as if he were trying to suppress a desperate cry. I didn't want ... he stammered, his voice failing. The words were like sharp knives, cutting the silence. Isabel saw his shoulders tremble, the fragility hidden behind that mask of hatred, a frightening facet of his tortured soul. He turned, his back curved under the weight of immeasurable pain, a pain that Isabel felt as if it were her own. The image of Bruno, destroyed by his sickly passion, struck her hard. The man who had threatened her was more broken than she had ever imagined. But compassion did not erase the fear. The threat was there, latent. He mumbled something inaudible and left, leaving Isabel in her room, bathed in scarlet moonlight, caught between fear and hope. Isabel knew that Bruno's visit had not been just an impulsive act. There was something more, a sinister plan that she could not yet decipher. Her heart beat strongly, a frantic rhythm that echoed the terror that invaded her. Had he only scared her? Or was he planning something much worse, something that could extinguish the flame of love that was reborn in her heart? Daniel's kisses, his warmth, now seemed like a distant memory, a delicious dream in the midst of a terrifying nightmare. The joy had become a thin thread, almost extinguished by Bruno's sinister shadow. The newly discovered happiness was a fragile flower, at the mercy of a volcano about to erupt. Isabel knew she was alone in her struggle. Daniel was a light, but Bruno's darkness was a deep and threatening abyss. Her life was between the flame of hope and the darkness of revenge. The red moon was a harbinger, an ominous sign that the storm was about to break. And Isabel, a widow accustomed to surviving storms, prepared to face the fiercest of them, a fight for her life and her newly discovered love. The moon, large and red as an ember, bathed the room in a sinister light. Isabel, still trembling from the encounter with Bruno, heard the echo of his menacing words. He doesn't want you, Isabel. You will never be happy. The image of Ricardo's brother, weakened but still carrying a deep hatred, haunted her. She got up, feeling the fragility of her legs, and went to the window. Outside, something moved in the shadows. A figure, sneaking through the bush, cautiously approaching the house. Isabel held her breath, her senses on high alert. The figure approached the window, and through the glass she saw the face. It was the face of Daniel, her beloved, but his eyes were wide with terror, his expression marked by deep fear. He was wounded, a deep cut bled on his arm, and he gestured desperately, trying to get her attention, while a second figure, huge and dark, emerged behind him. The shadow approached, menacing, stretching out its hands like sharp claws. Was it Bruno? Or would it be someone worse, someone even more dangerous who could end Daniel's life and finally end her happiness once and for all? Daniel's silent scream echoed in the air, cut by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the front door. Isabel felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. Was this the beginning of the end?